Tonight on Free Minds TV, the federal government appears to be going after Liberty dollars in the hands of individual collectors. We can finally point to a peer-reviewed study that clearly shows that marijuana is a treatment for certain kinds of cancer. We'll also be getting into a citizen ticketed for directing traffic, plus a whole lot more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
Welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
You know, we took a break last week. We actually had a show, but it was a special. It was a Gary Johnson special, but we had to switch around time. We're both in school. I'm in grad school, you're in college, and work and internships. Everything's crazy, so we had to switch around the time.
Schedule.
So we're back this week with a brand new episode, but if you didn't get to check out the Gary Johnson special. Check out last week's show. I think it is definitely worth watching. But we do have a lot to get into because it's been 2 weeks since we sat down with each other and did one of these shows. So let's get right into it. I do want to get into that story about marijuana curing cancer. I don't think it's actually marijuana. It's some of the chemicals in it, THC, to be
the active ingredient, which is what gets you high as well.
But it doesn't mean people out there should go start smoking pot to cure their cancer. We'll be getting into that. We're also going to be getting into some news for people if they want to protest. Word to the wise, don't use fireworks. We'll be telling you about one man who tried to use fireworks in a protest in Washington, D.C., and now is facing essentially life in prison for doing so. Also, we'll be getting into a man who was ticketed for trying to be a good Samaritan and directing traffic. But first, I'm flabbergasted by a story that came across.
Well, it's not entirely a surprise, but I am somewhat surprised it's gone this far.
We've been covering the Liberty dollar for years. Mm-hmm. For people who are not aware, the Liberty dollar is an alternative currency that essentially gets people off of the Federal Reserve notes, or provides them with an alternative to Federal Reserve notes. It's a currency that's actually backed by precious metals, being gold and silver. They don't report.
I think they issued some coppers right towards the end as well.
Yes, they did, right before they were raided.
And they did. I mean, it's not strictly coins. Most of them were not necessarily coins, but medallions. I think there was some.
You can't say coinage.
You can't say coin because then that's counterfeiting, which is the basic argument. The company that made the Liberty dollar, Norfed, was headed up by Bernard von Nothaus, who basically set up this currency, set up this company that people could use. They didn't claim to be U.S. dollars. Some of them do bear, like there's a $10 note, a $20 note. The way that works is it's a receipt. So you've essentially got a warehouse receipt for, now I think they started off with 1 ounce of silver or $10, redeemable, 10 US dollars, Federal Reserve notes, redeemable by the company. That's how it used to work before the federal government shut them down on counterfeiting charges.
Well, it wasn't only receipts that they had. They also had the actual precious metal pieces. They had silver pieces. They had gold pieces. I think they had a $500 gold ounce back when gold was only less than $500 an ounce. This wasn't all that long ago. And I do want to point out that there was a time, and not that long ago in the United States history, where Federal Reserve notes also had a receipt for an ounce of silver or gold. They were called silver and gold certificates for gold that was stored in a warehouse. All currency was backed by precious metals. And they've got off of that. They've been getting off of that. Well, it started in 1916, was it, or something? I don't know.
Well, 1913 was the introduction of the
1913.
Fed.
Anyway, so they've been getting off of that, and they've been completely off of backing their currency with precious metal for many years now. The Liberty dollar was picking up on that and saying, here's an alternative, something that is backed by something. Some people really started to use them, and that's when the Fed stepped in, when they started to get out there. Businesses were accepting them. People were opting to take Liberty dollars instead of Federal Reserve notes.
Those who did have made out pretty well, because with the run precious metals have had and with a weaker dollar, I think those $10 basis 1 ounce silver receipts in today's value, if Norfed were still operating, if you had those and you wanted to go turn them in for actual ounces of silver, they'd be worth about high 30s, $40, somewhere in that ballpark. So you would have nearly quadrupled your money as opposed to holding $10 bills.
Which has gone down since 2000. It has gone down, I think, 40% in buying power, not necessarily inflation, but in buying power. Your Federal Reserve notes have lost 40% instead of gaining a whole lot versus the Liberty dollar.
And they went after the company initially, and there was some concern by people who held the Liberty dollars, whether they're the actual coins or the receipts, which don't really have any value since the federal government already confiscated all of the warehouse metals that backed up the receipts. So people who are holding the receipts have already been screwed, basically, except for the collectible value that those slips might have. But there was, I thought it was somewhat paranoid to think that the federal government was going to come after individual people who owned these coins. Apparently, they're leaning towards doing that. Liberty dollar, this is coming from Coin World, which is a coin collecting, I believe it's a magazine. Liberty dollars held by collectors may be subject to seizure as contraband by federal law enforcement. Officials with the U.S. Attorney's Office and Secret Service said August 24th. Now, the reason they're doing this is they claim that because the charges against the people running the Liberty dollar were based on counterfeiting, people holding these are essentially doing the same thing as holding counterfeited money. But as you can see,
do these look like counterfeit bills? Does that look like a Federal Reserve note up on the screen?
Red 20.
I don't think so. You'd have to be a
fool to think that. Not many people pay with gold pieces anymore.
Right, and if you're trying to pass these off as Federal Reserve notes, you're a fool because they're worth so much more than a Federal Reserve note. You're losing money if you're doing that. Yeah. So the whole premise that it's a counterfeit bill is asinine to me because it's clearly just isn't.
Yeah, and Jill Rose, who's chief of the criminal division for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Charlotte, North Carolina, told Coin World on the 24th, back when they issued this statement, that the Liberty dollar medallions are confiscatable as contraband regardless if they are being exhibited for educational purposes.
So you can even have them in a museum.
Right. Wow. The American Numismatic Association can't display them. Rose also said that the Liberty dollar represented a pyramid scheme embedded with fraud that had nothing to do with trade or barter. They've gained value against the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is backed by nothing. A handful of bankers and their buddies at the Federal Reserve issue paper money with nothing to back it based on what they feel like doing to the economy. How is that not a Ponzi scheme that's inherently fraudulent? I would argue that the Liberty dollar was a much more honest operation. I realize that it was a business, they had associates. The pyramid scheme argument was that they did discount if you're an associate, but it certainly wasn't a pyramid scheme in that somebody has to get screwed. If you bought wholesale as an associate, you paid a lower price like you do
everybody
with
who
any
bought
commodity.
Them won.
It's commodity-backed money.
Essentially, before the feds raided them and essentially stole all the gold and silver in the warehouses, everybody who bought one came out on top. That doesn't happen in a pyramid scheme. It doesn't. People lose out in pyramid schemes. In the Liberty dollar, before the feds stole all that money, everybody was on top. And the people who still own the silver, I guess now they have to melt it down if they ever want to actually use it, unless they're going to trade on the black market. They all won out because precious metals, it's backed by something. It went up in value. It's
right.
It seems like the federal government's afraid of competition.
A better way to put it, I mean, it has gone up in value because there is something of a bubble or a hot market in commodities. But typically, over the long term, what gold and silver and other precious metals actually do is hold their value. They'll fluctuate a lot year to year, but if you look over the course of 100 or 200 years, or even a shorter time span, 20 or 30 years, typically what they do is they index for inflation, the devaluation of paper money, which is not just the U.S. dollar, by the way. The U.S. dollar for the last 100 years has been one of the most stable fiat currencies.
Only losing 98% of its value.
Yeah, but
just 98.
But all the world's major currencies are fiat currencies. The euro, which it looks like it could be headed for trouble before the U.S. dollar. I mean, all of them, even the ones that are relatively stable and well backed for a fiat currency. I think that the Swiss keep something like 8 or 9 or 10% gold reserves as part of their reserve holdings to back their currency. But even then, Swiss francs aren't convertible to gold. None of the world's major currencies issued by a central bank or issued by a national government are commodity backed. None of them are limited in the way that a currency that's on a gold or a silver or a copper or a mud brick standard, it doesn't matter what it is. You can base it on barrels of oil or gallons of milk. I don't know what. There's some problems with doing it that way. There's a reason gold and silver are usually used. But none of them are backed by anything. And we're supposed to be happy that the federal government is cracking down on people who went with this alternative and actually made out a whole lot better. Why should we be happy about that? I don't see who they're hurting there.
It's funny, if this was another country, if you were using another country's money, is that also fraud? Can you use Canadian dollars inside the US? Because it seems like this is just an alternative currency that people were using. Is it illegal to use, say, the euro in the US? Is it illegal to use other currencies?
I mean, Canadian dollars say dollars on there.
It's true, and that's...
They've got stuff about Canada, but how am I to know that the U.S. Mint didn't just decide to do like a...
You know, it makes me wonder, if they're cracking down on the Liberty dollar now, how long until... It makes me paranoid. Maybe I am just paranoid until they go after gold and silver again.
You know, for decades it was illegal to own gold in the United States, which a lot of people don't know, but after Roosevelt confiscated it during the New Deal, during the Depression, I think it was not until after it was demonetized back in the 70s that you could actually own gold again. Maybe I think that's correct.
It was a while.
It was decades. I mean, it was decades where you couldn't own gold. People.
Was it over paranoid to think
people
that
used
maybe
to
it's
smuggle
time
gold in from Canada as opposed to pot? People used to smuggle gold pieces in from Canada because gold ownership was still legal in Canada. Those nasty socialists up there. It's still legal to own gold, not here in the U.S. So people were actually smuggling pieces down. I mean, that happened quite a bit.
And now people are smuggling Liberty dollars because now they're a black market commodity as well, I guess. Wow. And their price will only go up in value, I guess, because
I suppose. I mean,
collectors.
I don't know how stringently this will be enforced. And they said, I mean, they're being vague as government.
I think what they're doing,
they're trying to scare people.
They're saying, don't try this, because if you try to have a competing currency, something that's backed by a commodity, well, we're going to shut you down. I think that's what they're doing. They're bolstering. I don't see them raiding individual houses. Maybe if you own a few, like thousands of dollars worth, they might come and knocking at your door and confiscate them. But I don't see them going after people with just one coin or something.
Probably not. But I mean, I think this has to do with the fact that the honest money movement and really people debating monetary policy, it's a bigger part of the national debate today than I think it has been since
Kennedy?
Maybe since Jackson.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot of debate. There was a lot of anger when Roosevelt confiscated gold and when they demonetized silver. But there was some debate. But I mean, I think we're going to have a debate about the fundamental nature of the monetary system that we haven't really had. The Federal Reserve was adopted in secret, not by really with a whole lot of public debate beforehand. Really, since Andrew Jackson, I don't think we've had a debate like the one we're going to have about monetary policy. So they're going to push back. They did the same thing during that one.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving right along, we have other stories we've got to get into. We've talked about this subject many times. The Good Samaritan, trying to do something, seeing a problem, going out there and doing the job that only the government's supposed to do, I guess. Whether this be, we talked about clearing brush and fallen trees after a tornado. Apparently you have to be licensed by the government to do that. Talking whatever you want to do, giving water to Katrina victims. That's a government responsibility. How dare private companies try to do that? The Good Samaritan stepping in and trying to help. Government saying no. This coming from California, South Pasadena. We've all heard the saying, no good deed goes unpunished. And that's exactly what happened in South Pasadena to a South Pasadena resident who was issued a ticket by police for his charitable act. When a major traffic light in the area went out Thursday morning, Alan Ehrlich took matters into his own hands, directing traffic at Fair Oaks and Huntington Avenues. I grabbed a bright orange shirt and I have a couple of orange safety flags. I took it upon myself to get the motorists through the intersection faster, he said. Before Ehrlich stepped in, traffic was backed up for more than a mile. It took over 30 minutes to get through the busy intersection. Ehrlich said the September 8th incident wasn't the first time that light goes dead. He says it happens regularly. It was just kind of a chaos of cars. There were stop signs up, but people were challenging each other to get through the intersection, said one of the area business owners. Gurish, the business owner, said Ehrlich cleared up the mess in about 10 minutes. After 15 minutes, South Pasadena police say they finally received a call about the newest traffic officer. Police responded to the scene and told Ehrlich to stop and issued him a ticket. Not a thank you, yes, a ticket. Then they drove away. They never stepped in and started directing traffic themselves. I don't know if the ticket is for $50 or for $400, Ehrlich said. It's a small price to pay for the greater good. Pasadena Police Chief Joe Payne said he did not have the manpower needed to staff the officers in Fair Oaks and Huntington Thursday, and that it's safer to allow traffic just to back up. Police said the city of South Pasadena currently has no plans to change their procedures. So, yeah, I guess don't step in and help out because you can get a ticket.
You're just supposed to sit helpless in a traffic jam when all it really takes. How hard is flagging, really?
No.
Real hard.
You stop,
wait.
your turn.
Oh, how do I do that? Now I stop you and I let you go, so I don't let both sides go at once.
They lack the manpower. He said, "Fine, I'll step in. I'll
I
clear
can't
this mess
understand
up."
why cops direct traffic
Because it's triple overtime.
at all. Well, I can understand in emergencies why they direct traffic. Right, it is triple. It is, at least here in New Hampshire, and it works this way in many other places. Those cops directing traffic, they're just banking overtime hours because of the way the retirement system is structured. And if they have a couple of years with a whole lot of overtime, they get a really nice retirement, regardless of what they do in the other years, is basically how it works. If you have a construction project, you don't need to be paying a state trooper, who I think make in the 50s up to 60. I think it depends on how long you've been on the job. They're not cheap labor.
Living.
Why should you make more than $9 or $10 an hour without benefits to direct traffic? I mean, it's a pretty basic job. Actually, I think it would be a lot harder to screw up as a flagger than it would be to screw up as, say, a cashier.
Yep.
Cashiers usually don't make over 50 grand a year. So how is this acceptable that we just use traffic, the police departments get to put officers on traffic duty so that members of the department can rake in a whole bunch of taxpayer money? I don't know.
And why?
I don't get paid $50,000 a year to direct traffic. I wish the private sector offered such opportunities.
I wish that the government would allow citizens to step in and do it for free without ticketing them. That's what I wish. A little bit of freedom here and there. All right, moving along. Another area where the government says no, do not touch. Federal government says marijuana is a Schedule I drug, meaning it has zero medical benefits. Nothing to it. It's on the same class as heroin.
Right.
No, zero. They just came out with it this past summer. They did a study. They say zero medical benefits. None. That's it. Case closed. It's been that way since the war on drugs in Nixon's era.
Yeah. Which is not
Despite
true.
many medical studies saying it
a
does
lot
have
of studies
medical
have
benefits.
been done, and I think we're going to post this up on the show content page so that people can review it if they want to go to the website.
freemindstv.com. Check out the forums, and the show content will be there for the full peer-reviewed study.
Right, because a lot of times we reference studies. Unfortunately, it's difficult to find the actual study.
Yeah, and
you might
this
go
is
through
where
several
I think
articles about a study said, but a lot of times the best you can do is finding out that such and such an institution did a study, and they don't actually give you the study.
Right.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm pretty good with dry technical stuff. This is a real peer-reviewed study. How do I know this? Because it uses...
You can't pronounce any of the words?
Right, and it uses abbreviations that I've never heard before.
Yeah, it's many pages long.
MEK/ERK/RSK pathway leading to translocation of
Well, Nick, one thing I think, before we get into this, one thing I think that marijuana advocates in general, where they shoot themselves in the foot, is they don't reference these studies. They just say, studies say, and then they go on about how the federal government and governments won't recognize the medical benefits, rather than pointing to the research and letting the research speak for itself. And over and over again, you go on these websites and news websites, and instead of trying to get picked up on some of the major media outlets and point to the peer-reviewed study, they just complain and complain. So I just think it's important to actually post the real research out there so people can take a look at it.
Right, and apparently, I mean, this was dealing specifically with...
THC.
Right, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, which I can pronounce, unlike a lot of the things in here. And this, specifically how they kill certain kinds of leukemia leukemia cells and how they interact with the cells in your body that attack cancer. And they found that it's even more effective when they pair it with U0126, which is a selective inhibitor. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it was the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, Medical College of Virginia campus, and the Virginia Commonwealth University jointly did this study. They've posted really good data. And I realize you might not be able to read all the terms, but if you define a couple of the important ones, you can pretty clearly show what their data is showing here.
Well, one thing you can definitely show is it should not be a Schedule I drug, because when you have a Schedule I drug with no medical benefits, you lose out on research dollars. It's very difficult to research the chemicals in marijuana because it has no medical benefits according to the federal government. So that's the most important thing. It does have medical benefits, but it's difficult to find out how they are because of the government's getting in the way. And I also want to state that some of the other places where marijuana advocates shoot themselves in the foot and say, yeah, you should go smoke pot because it reduces cancer. That's not what this study is saying. I don't know the delivery system, whether it's
right. Well, they're focusing
the individual
on
chemical.
Right, they're focusing on one cannabinol
out of hundreds of them that are in a marijuana
Actually,
plant.
I think they're focusing on one particular. There's different. I think I'm not a chemist by any means, and this is obvious. This is a specific permutation of THC. So they're focusing, I believe, on one. I don't know exactly what you call it. If it's ionized, it's the way the molecule is structured. There's different ways the THC molecule can be structured.
Molecular structure.
So, I mean, they're showing this is a scientific study. The point of the study is not to show, pot is good at fighting cancer. It's much more specific.
Much more complicated.
Right.
But the point is,
studies,
more studies
when we
should
say
be done.
studies do show, I know you can't see all the graphs, but there's graphs here. And they even talk about things like standard deviations and stuff like that.
There's lots of them. And the point is they need more of these studies. If the federal government 40-some years ago didn't declare marijuana zero medical benefits, they'd be studying this stuff for the last 40 years, and they might actually have something. But instead, they're 40 years behind. Why? Because the federal government knows best and goes with the fear-mongering stuff from the 1930s, all this reefer madness BS, and instead of actually looking at the scientific data. All right, we do need to move on. One more story to get out there. Word to the wise for people who want to protest. I know a lot of people are upset with the economy and the big banks and the everything. It's falling apart, Nick. The systems are crumbling.
This Greek debt crisis thing, that could get interesting.
And people are very upset and they want to protest. But what is the best way to protest? Well, you definitely want to be visible. You want to get on the news, right? So
you do want to get attention. That's the point of a protest.
Because that's the point of protest. You want people to see you. But one way you might not want to protest is with fireworks. Well, you might. It wouldn't be a bad form of civil disobedience if you're willing to give up the rest of your life.
It would get you a lot of attention. That's for
apparently. I never.
There's a cost benefit.
There is definitely a cost benefit.
I think in a different period in American history,
before 9/11.
Yeah, like 11 years ago, this story wouldn't be. I don't believe that these charges would have been filed.
The government would like you to know that fireworks are for celebration, not for protest. Felony charges were filed Tuesday against a Florida man who planned to set off a large quantity of fireworks on the National Mall to protest the U.S. banking industry policies. Authorities claimed that authorities detained Glenn Neff, 27, after they spotted him in a red Jeep Cherokee that was parked in an isolated part of the park after closing time on Monday. Well, he was isolated at least. He wasn't doing it in a crowded spot. Neff, a resident of Stuart, Florida, told authorities that he did not want to hurt anyone and was planning to detonate the fireworks to draw attention to himself and the issues with the banking industry. Well, I guess that would draw attention to himself, but unfortunately he didn't get to the explosion part of the fireworks. He just got the scary terrorist charge parts of the fireworks. 3 felony charges were filed on Tuesday against Neff, each of which carry a sentence of up to 25 years, essentially a life sentence there. He's 27, unless he lives to over 102, an old man when he gets out. Those charges are possession of destructive device, transport of destructive device, and manufacture of a destructive device. Does that mean I get those if it's 4th of July too? To transport, and when I go to the fireworks store, I buy my fireworks?
The way he was intending, to be clear, he was intending to just light off a fireworks display.
That's what he says.
He wasn't going to blow anything up with it.
Oh, he was going to set off fireworks without a permit. Bond has been set for $2 million. Woo! Wow. he did pick a poor time to do this. Well, maybe a good time for attention purposes, but September 8. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a little bit older. This is right before this is late August. So late August, right before as they're amping up security for the 10-year anniversary of September 11th. I guess that didn't bode real well for him.
Right, but I mean, to be clear here, the charge is that he was transporting and creating a destructive device. He wasn't actually going to do anything destructive with it.
That's what he claims.
And you really couldn't. Well, fireworks are a very poor vehicle for doing any kind of real damage. You could, if you have a road flare in your car and your gas tank is full, you could probably do more damage with that.
That's very true. It's cheaper too.
And I could see if you were duct taping your road flare to your gas tank on the National Mall, how they might claim that you were making a dangerous device. But in this case, what you have is a political protest using fireworks. If he'd shot them off for a celebration, he probably would have been charged with a noise violation, probably because he's on the mall, something about doing something without a permit, and you probably can't do private firework displays in Washington, D.C., especially without permission. He would be facing fines and maybe a small period of time in jail as opposed to a life sentence. Because he was using fireworks in connection, and fireworks are technically explosive, in connection with anything political, he gets these charges. I mean, it's interesting to note, Toby, that making a Molotov cocktail in the state of New Hampshire carries a 2.5-year prison sentence. It's a felony to make a Molotov cocktail on your own property. I think it actually says, the way the law is written, you actually have to insert a fuse into the device or a wick and then throw it. So you can make a Molotov cocktail, as I've read the law, and say shoot it on the ground or something. That goes back to the Red Scare, because it was assumed that communists are going to make Molotov cocktails and use them, to try to overthrow the
communists like
system.
Molotov cocktails?
Well, in some parts of the world they do.
Is the 4th of July not political? Isn't it the 4th of July, Independence Day? Isn't that a political celebration?
Yeah, and we're celebrating political violence, actually. Political violence against your government is actually what we celebrate. Political violence against the government with our fireworks, our explosives, every year. There's
no double standard here.
This is acceptable, and that is exactly what you're celebrating. Whether you realize it in that context or not, that's the purpose of the fireworks. Fireworks actually, the connection to that celebration is largely, that they're evocative of war and bombs going off and musket fire and cannon fire and things like that. That was that's one of the whole reasons that military victories.
I imagine that Mr. Neff had that idea too when he was going to set them off there. Start a revolution. He says a nonviolent one, of course, hopefully. But I wish him luck.
I'm not convinced he was trying to blow up a bank with fireworks. It would have been hard to do if he was.
I wish him luck, poor man. 75 years. Whew, that's a tough sentence. Well, we're out of time. Check out the show content page for all the details. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great week.